Hi everyone, this is Andrew Prima, Ukrainian American, reporting from Kiev. In today's podcast, 56th week of war in Ukraine, and this is the last week of March 2023. In today's podcast, the new massive strikes over civilian infrastructure, updates from the Bakhmut area, President of China visits Putin, however, Putin is disappointed. International Criminal Court issued a warrant for Putin's arrest. So, Russia carried out two massive strikes on residential buildings in the last 24 hours. So, during Tuesday, last night, drone attack, Russia launched 21 Iranian made Shahed drones into Ukraine, 16 of which were eliminated by Ukraine armed forces. Unfortunately, 7 people were killed in the Kiev region near the capital of Ukraine. They were killed overnight at a dormitory building in Zhychev town. Police and emergency service evacuated more than 200 people. 20 of them were taken to the hospital, and a few are still missing. Another strike was over the Zhytomyr region, which is only 100 kilometers or 70 miles from the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv. 3 drones were shot down by Ukraine air defenses, according to the local military administration. The Ukraine State Emergency Service said that the second massive strike on a residential building killed 1 person and 32 others were injured by missile strike in Zaporizhia on Wednesday. Russian forces fired at least 6 missiles at the eastern Ukrainian city. So Russians don't stop. Russians keep on killing civilians, and as we know, the precision of Russian rockets deteriorated. That's why even aiming sometimes at the energy infrastructure or the military bases, those rockets fly into residential buildings, or they just aim at residential buildings on purpose. So the updates from the front lines, and the hottest spot is still Bakhmut region. So the Wagner private army mercenaries who tried to take Bakhmut exile. This was announced by the commander of the ground forces, Colonel Chief General Alexander Siersky. Very soon, we will take advantage of this opportunity as we once did near Kiev, Kharkiv, Balaklia, and Kupiansk, he added. The private army head, Yevgeny Prigozhin, started kind of losing interest in Ukraine. As you remember, he had issues with the main Russian armed forces, and he complained constantly that he was not supplied ammunition, and he's been struggling in the Bakhmut. He couldn't make any progresses, and he was really criticized by that. Meanwhile, the Bloomberg agency reported all those issues and that the owner of the Wagner private army, Prigozhin, is preparing to wind down the operations of his private army in Ukraine after numerous failures. As the interlocutors of the agency noted, Putin's cook, as they called Prigozhin, decided to wind down the operations in Ukraine after the Russian military command managed to reduce the recruitment of people to the army and the supply of ammunition to the private army members. According to the sources, now Prigozhin plans to focus his attention again on Africa. Actually, this is where this army started its existence and the first operation in Africa. There are currently no signs of the mercenaries being redeployed, but people familiar with this situation say operations there are likely to draw more attention to Prigozhin in the future as the situation in Ukraine becomes more difficult for him. I believe that Bakhmut actually is the place where the Russian army is gonna die. said American officer Dan Rice, who is actually advisor to Commander in Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Valery Zaluzhny. He explained that now the Ukrainian army is killing about 25,000 Russian soldiers every month, and those figures were almost the same the previous month. And another 75,000 occupiers are being wounded. Russia got into a meat grinding trap where Ukraine armed forces weakening the Russian potential for the future offensive. Moreover, it has been seen on the front lines that Russia uses outdated Soviet T 54 and T 55 tanks at the front instead of destroyed modern ones. It actually will not help to restore its ability to conduct mechanized maneuver warfare and can only increase the level of Russian losses. Can you imagine these T 54 tanks were produced in Russia in 1946, right after the World War II? And the other model, T 55 model, was made in 1967, and all those models were discontinued actually. There is a clear sign that Russia is running out of ammunition and military equipment. Against the background of reports from the West that Russia's troops might try to develop an offensive in a new direction of the front, however, there are obvious signs that Russians slowing down of the pace of offensive operations around Bakhmut. As were earlier reported, so Russia decreased the number of attacks from on average 60 70 per day to 2025. So this now the occupiers are increasing the pace of offensive operations around Avdiivka, which is a suburb of Donetsk, with the aim of enriching it. And it's possible that they are making these efforts at the expense of operations in around Bakhmut. So basically, they decrease the number of offensive operations in Bakhmut in trying to concentrate on Avdiivka because they know Ukraine armed forces holding the Bakhmut and the Russian number of Ukrainian troops are holding the positions. Since the beginning of March 2023, fierce fighting has been going on in the area of Svyatovo Kreminna in Luhansk region. Russian forces partially regained control of the nearest approaches to Crimea, where they were previously threatened by Ukraine. In some places, the Russian Federation has advanced several kilometers. At the same time, according to Ukrainian intelligence, operationally in the northeast, the enemy is more defensive. The Russian command probably feared that this is one of the sectors where Ukraine can carry out major offensive operations, the department added. Due to the intensity of these battles, the armed forces of Ukraine are focused to expend 4 to 7,000 artillery shells every day. The current level of ammunition consumption is higher than the level of production, said NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. As you know, there was a big news about Chinese president visiting Russia, and the world was watching that very closely. The visit of Xi Jinping to Moscow and his declaration of peace didn't change the Kremlin's desire to destroy Ukraine. This is evidenced by the attacks on Zaporizhia in Kiev region while they were meeting in Kremlin. These attacks were carried out by Russian Federation those days, said John Kirby, strategic communications coordinator of the National Security Council of the White House. Putin continues to find the new cruel ways to kill Ukrainians and is trying to actually destroy Ukrainian cities to erase Ukraine from the world map as an independent sovereign state. According to Kirby, statements by Putin and Xi about the need to preserve independence and adhere to the UN chapter are ironic. Therefore, Putin definitely didn't change his tactics after this high rhetoric about peace and the cessation of hostilities in Ukraine, the White House representative noted. The Chinese leader didn't live up to the Kremlin's expectations. The Kremlin regime didn't achieve the desired results after the meeting between Chinese President and Putin. I personally think that Putin had much higher hopes for the result of this visit for himself and for Russia. Half, or maybe even two-thirds of these hopes didn't come true for Russia. Indeed, the Chinese leader didn't take any military alliance or partnership, any new contracts for the supply of certain types of weapons, any clear position in support of Russia. As we know, Chinese president will think about his nation first. By supporting Russia, he understands he will cut the ties with the West. And as we know, China is selling 3.5 trillion of goods to the Western countries. So he knows that he cannot support Russia. He's not interested in getting into the fight with the West. For Putin, the only chance to save himself is not to end this war. It's now clear that China is not joining the war. This was the biggest risk we could imagine because it would very significantly expand Russia's resources base and could really seriously change their combat potential. If there are no collusive arrangements, then this risk has not arisen now. But it's too early to say because things can still develop and things can change at any moment. We might see some other actions from China that will actually indicate that it has taken a side. And especially, we have to look at the fact that if there is so-called peace initiative do not find a response, what position they will take at that moment. Unfortunately, China is still a completely unknown component, and we have to look at it very carefully and very intensively. On March 17th, the International Criminal Court issued a warrant for Putin's arrest for war crimes. The first charge concerns the abduction of children from Ukraine. The issuance of an arrest warrant by International Criminal Court is the most politically significant of recent developments, as it designates Putin as a wanted and suspected war criminal, subject to arrest in any country that recognizes the ICC, which most do. And this is also not a single that can be ignored by Russian elites who are thinking about the future of their country. This will hinder Putin's international trips, and not only in the obvious sense of the word. From now on, every time he gets on a plane, he have to ask if the pilot can just take him somewhere where he will be arrested. We must understand that this is the beginning of a very serious campaign to recognize Putin and his entire team as international criminals. This decision cannot be underestimated because, first of all, it affects the many countries that have not yet decided. Those countries that have been decided, of course, will only strengthen their position. And this is a big plus because any businesses that try to work with Russia or the politicians who try to say something about the negotiations, all these people who are talking about some concessions and everything else will be saying it much more carefully. And those businesses that were thinking about doing business with Russia will fold because they will understand that as long as the regime is in power, it doesn't make any sense. So there's a lot of speculations about Ukraine future counteroffensive. First of all, that is not and cannot be 100% ideal situation, especially in the situation in which we currently are. We're really working on the edge of possibilities. Of course, there are as many difficult moments and situations, And if some journalists expect that Ukraine will fight against the army of the world, then this would be a completely naive position. Most of the experts, analysts, politicians of the West, like all of us, highly appreciate the qualifications of the armed forces of Ukraine. We have extremely qualified leadership, and we must continue to believe to Ukraine armed forces. We understand that it's very difficult and there will be situations, but we must understand that Ukraine will come out of them with dignity. Besides the readiness of armed forces, another very important issue is brought up is Western supplies to Ukraine, Western ammunition supplies to Ukraine. The intensity is not satisfactory at all. It would be wrong to say that everything is happening as we wanted or as we planned. It is one thing to get political statements or political commitments. This is a huge part of the job because without them, nothing would happen at all. And here, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, together with our partners, are doing their jobs. There are no questions, but how our partners then fulfill these obligations and very often leads to delays. That's a fact as well. Indeed, a lot of equipment arrives very quickly, and this is also true. But some countries, in any case, will supply either for a very long time or not completely or without technical support or training. Russia, Russia, don't don't wait for Ukraine armed forces to get strong because they know the West supplies weapons. Some of them supply faster, some of them slower, but Russia's losing power at the front lines. But at the same time, Ukraine is gaining its power as well. So Russia will carry out mobilization and plans to carry out mobilization until it loses the war. We know Russia will not stop, and the world knows it very well. Any constructive stoppage of the war on the part of Russia, negotiations or otherwise, is completely unrealistic. It was clear that they had already completely let go of all the chances for some kind of civilized settlement of the war, this conflict, and had already gone all in. Putin understands that losing the war is the end of his regime, so he will do everything to ensure that the war doesn't end. For him, the only chance to save himself is not to end this war because he understands that he will not be able to end it with victory. This is already and mathematically even unreal. We can see it. And fortunately, the entire world political community already agrees with this, which was not the case before. He cannot end this war with a victory for himself, and any defeat or recognition that he cannot end it with victory is actually a disaster for Putin. Therefore, he will continue it as long as he has the strength. And for us, this means only one thing: we have to physically push the Russians out of the territory. We will conduct counteroffensive operations until the last soldier either falls or leaves the territory of Ukraine. This is our only chance to become fully independent from the country aggressor. And then, together with our partners, we must create such a system of strengthening Ukrainian capabilities. And I hope we're going to become a NATO member, which would make a relapse on the part of the Russian government impossible. And to continue all our actions regarding prosecution, sanctions, compensations for damages, which should bring the Russian regime to bankruptcy physically. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to Ukrainian and foreign soldiers fighting for the freedom of Ukraine. Thank you for listening to my podcast. Please share with your friends and listen to our earlier podcasts.